Hello, Rowena. We would like you very much to tell us about the draft guidelines for transgender participation for all sporting bodies in New Zealand and how they are placing inclusion above all else. Also, if you could tell us how are events developing regarding participation of males in women's events, and do you know of any other planned actions you could share with us? Because we understand that you have recently launched a campaign, and we also would like to know how that's going.
We started being involved in this process last year when World Rugby brought out their trans eligibility guidelines. We sent their policy and the summary of their research to as many sporting organisations around New Zealand as we possibly could. We also sent a slightly revised version of the policy Coach Linda Blade uses for Athletics Alberta as a suggestion of how they could protect female athletes. What we hadn't realised until earlier this year is that Sport New Zealand had actually drafted a trans inclusion policy and were about to post it on their website without any consultation with anyone before they started getting contacted by all these sporting organisations who'd been in touch with concerns about transgender inclusion. Then New Zealand Rugby rejected World Rugby's guidelines and basically decided to embark on developing their own policy with Sport New Zealand. And so Sport New Zealand thought while they were developing the New Zealand Rugby policy, they would get the consultants to also develop transgender participation guidelines for all sports. So they set a consultation process to do that, which involved 9 rainbow organisations, 3 academics. One was a trans woman who teaches hospitality, another one teaches gender studies, and one amazing professor who knew what she was talking about. A number of sporting organisations were involved as well, a lot from Australia, who basically developed their policies without any consultation with the public at all. And we were involved too, but unfortunately the consultants decided to ignore everything that was said that didn't fit the outcomes they wanted, and they've ended up developing a policy that places inclusion above all else. It basically states that people can participate in the category of sport that they wish, use the changing rooms that they wish, that their biological sex cannot be questioned or talked about. So the disappointing part of it is that the whole policy, and basically it says exactly the same thing as their draft policy that we've managed to get through an Official Information Act request that they developed last year. It says essentially the same thing, but it's now there's 12 different principles that they work through. But every single example and scenario that they give in these guidelines is looked through the lens of a transgender person. Not once does it acknowledge the implications on the sporting clubs and how they manage this, because how do they manage knowing where people should fit and the health and safety of the athletes participating? It doesn't acknowledge the impact on volunteers having to deal with these issues, because there's so many things. How do they stop males going into female changing rooms? Because if they challenge them and they say, no, we're trans women, then the volunteers will basically be in trouble because they've misgendered somebody. But most importantly, it doesn't recognise the implications on female athletes. And it's from the fairness perspective, it's from the safety perspective, it's from the opportunities, but it's also really from, most importantly, the participation perspective. We already have a massive drop-off of females involved in sports through their teenage years. And we also know that young women are very body conscious through that period of time. It's bad enough getting changed in front of other females, let alone having a male body in your changing rooms. And if they don't believe that, or they're not comfortable in their changing rooms, they don't believe there's any point in participating because they're not going to win or have those opportunities, they might just not bother. So it's just really disappointing how many opportunities will potentially be lost to male bodies, but just how little thought was given to females through the whole development of this policy. So when the draft came out, I think Sport New Zealand were trying to keep it all very under the radar. They didn't really want anyone to know it was out, but they didn't make it confidential. So we published it on our website. We also sent it out to every single sporting association that we had contact details for with our thoughts on it. We then actively started campaigning with an open letter to our Minister of Sport, asking that they extend the consultation of the guiding principles so that it actually included all of our sporting associations and all of their stakeholders. So they had the opportunity to provide feedback to it. We managed to get over 70 Olympians, New Zealand Olympians and retired elite athletes to sign that letter, which was just incredible. And even after it was sent, names kept coming in as well of athletes who wanted to sign. So it was amazing to have that support. Unfortunately, our Minister for Sport has written off the letter completely, basically saying that we were trying to conflate community sports with elite sports, which we weren't. Because community sports is the pipeline to elite sports. So if girls miss out on opportunities at community level, they will never, ever have opportunities at the elite level. But he has used that argument all the way through and basically just written off our concerns. We also had a parliamentary petition that we put online on Parliament's website here in New Zealand. It was only on for, I think, 12 days, and we got 5,311 signatures on it, which was pretty amazing. So we presented that on Parliament steps and got quite a bit of media around that. We've also raised awareness on social media through just boosting posts, like asking people to contact their local, regional and national sporting organisations, as well as Sport New Zealand, to let them know their thoughts. So we're really trying to just highlight this issue. And in a weird way, Hubbard has actually done us a favour, because it's triggered, you know, the inclusion of Laurel Hubbard in the Olympics, a 43-year-old biological male in the Olympics, has actually triggered so many people because they can see how unfair it is. And so that's actually helped raise the profile. And after sending out press releases to journalists and never being acknowledged for, you know, for the past sort of 18 months, all of a sudden they started contacting us for comment, which was just fantastic. So it kind of feels like we've made progress, but it's interesting. We had a journalist here in New Zealand at Stuff Tonight publish a defamatory article that was actually incorrect, accusing us of using images that we didn't have the authorization to use. We'd actually purchased those images, so we had full authorization to use them, but she still published the article without getting confirmation from us that what she was publishing was correct. And so there's definitely, I think, because we've started gaining some profile now and we're getting some traction, there's definitely quite a big push to take us down as well.
Not only the Olympic Games, because Harvard is going to have international repercussions. Even here in Spain, the weightlifting federation is concerned about that case because it's going to affect Spanish athletes competing at the Olympics. But is there anything else at New Zealand level that you would like us to know about the proposed changes in legislation, for instance?
Yeah, so we've also got sex self-ID that our government's trying to push through, as I know your government in Spain is as well, and they're looking to do that in around August. So we've been holding meetings with Speak Up for Women, who's our sort of our women's rights group here, around the country, trying to raise awareness of that. Yeah, it's really interesting with Hubbard because at the end of the day, the IOC developed really flawed rules. They know those rules are flawed, and that, you know, they say that their guidelines are a living document, yet even after knowing they were flawed well over probably 18 months to 2 years ago, they haven't changed them. And, you know, they said that it would be unfair to those athletes that had already qualified through that criteria. What about the unfairness to all the female athletes who have missed out? Now, we've had a weightlifter in New Zealand who has quit weightlifting. You know, she dropped a weight category, like lost a hell of a lot of weight and dropped a weight category to try and avoid having to compete against Hubbard, but it was just too much, so she's quit. You know, so the inclusion of males in female sport comes at the exclusion of females. It's a zero-sum game, you know, and yeah, it's just, I think the Olympics are incredibly disappointing with how they've acted on this. And as we understand it too, the International Weightlifting Federation wanted more research on this when this rule was decided, but they didn't have the money to do it. So it was just flagged and they went with what the IOC had said. So yeah, everyone knows it's wrong. We've got a whole lot of people justifying it, especially sporting leaders, whether it's because they feel they have to or they're just virtue signalling, I don't know, but it's incredibly frustrating.
Is there any legislation about, you know, they are trying also to enhance the definition of what a hate crime is, about what hate speech is. So are you in trouble in New Zealand for speaking against these kind of things, especially in sports with Harvard? Because I mean, not everyone knows that he's a very wealthy from a very wealthy, influential family. So maybe that could explain how these policies came to be. Are you in trouble for speaking out about this?
Because so interestingly, as well as the sex self-ID legislation the New Zealand government's trying to push through, they're also trying to push through hate speech legislation, and gender identity will be a protected identity within the hate speech laws. So yes, we all kind of have a giggle and say, well, we'll be in prison this time next year, but yeah, so we're fighting against, we feel like we're fighting on all fronts at the moment. Actually, the hate speech legislation that will actually stop us speaking our truth, you know, because it will be hate speech to say that trans women shouldn't be able to compete in women's sport, you know, and or calling trans women biological women will be hate speech potentially as well. Sorry, biological men will be hate speech. So yeah, we are fighting on quite a number of fronts at the moment, and yeah, we just hope that we get some wins. And I think the more that we shine light on this with the general public, the more chance we have, because we've had, interestingly, one of our breakfast shows, when all the Olympic and elite athletes signed our open letter, it kind of gave the media confidence to start talking about this, because they had all been censoring themselves because they are also nervous to touch the issue. But having all those athletes, those incredible athletes, sign that letter gave the media confidence to actually discuss it. And one of our main breakfast shows put up a poll asking whether trans women should be able to compete against cis women in sport. And 92% of New Zealanders said no. And it was one of their biggest polls they've ever had. So again, that gave people more confidence to speak about it, because we all know that the majority of people know it's unfair and are willing to say that it's unfair. It's just that we have sporting leaders and a government that is just so busy virtue signalling and being trans inclusive that they're being woman exclusive and not, they're just not seeing the issues, unfortunately. So hopefully we'll keep campaigning. We've got we're about to do a massive mail out to all the sporting associations we've got contacts for around New Zealand, and we're going to basically send them a flyer. We've done email, so now we're doing posts. We're trying to get them on all fronts so that they have to acknowledge the issues, and we're going to challenge them to protect female sport in the female sports category, basically.